Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. We are starting off the weekend with an exciting set, and everything is for sale. Reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, for your purchase and pricing questions about anything you see here. Some of the prices are in the description below, some of them are not, but I have all the prices at tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Also, holidays are coming, and I'm looking to build inventory. One watch for an entire collection. We will buy your watches. We pay cash. We wire money fast. Reach out to me if you want to sell one watch for an entire collection, no upper limit on value paid. Once again, that email address is tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Okay, here's something you don't often see. Now, I promised that I would start with the thumbnail watch every time. I'm going to break my promise just this once because I have all three of the primary of the moon ceramic case Omegas on the table today, and this is just an absolute riot. We have 2013's dark side of the moon, 2014's gray side of the moon, and 2015's white side of the moon. And yes, I am a big white side fan. These timepieces, all 44.25 millimeters in ceramic, do differ from each other in several significant respects, but let's start with the basics. This timepiece was an absolute revolution when it arrived back in 2013. For the first time in memory, Omega had a waitlisted watch, and I'm talking Rolex style waitlists, a year or more. It's got a ceramic dial, a ceramic bezel, a ceramic case, and while it is a moon watch, it's anything but another Speedmaster Professional. Now, the timepiece is very well loomed. As you can see, plenty of luminescence, almost scratch-proof with every external surface, sapphire or ceramic. The watch is easy to wear because all of those materials are light in weight, and it has caliber 9300 on the reverse side. Mechanically, these watches are identical. Coaxial escapement, we have a column wheel vertical clutch chronograph, 60-hour power reserve. We have a COSC chronometer certification, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and then a full balance bridge with a free sprung index to make it all tough. Twin mainspring barrels as well to allow a very even torque release from max wind to minimum wind and allow for minimal fluctuation and balance amplitude over the runtime. When you throw it on the wrist, it's stark. The dark side of the moon is exactly that. It's not the black, and it's not the vintage black. There are other versions of this that came out in 15, but this is, to many, the quintessential ceramic Omega. That said, it's not my favorite on the table. That honor goes to the watch that came out the next year, the gray side of the moon. And let's start with the basics. Omega surpassed itself with a fully loomed bezel, and they even went a little bit quirky, looming the insert on the crown side. So this watch takes everything to the next level with a gray ceramic case, and you can see it has polished facets and satin facets, and that's the same finishing you would get on a steel or precious metal or titanium Omega. They're able to execute the same finishing on ceramic, which is exceptional. But the best feature of this watch is the dial. Each one of these watches features the name of the material used right near the cannon pinion. You see zirconium oxide right here. What you find here, if you look, let's get that chrono seconds hand out of the way. You can see here it says PT950. This is a solid platinum dial with a sandpaper texture and white gold hands and indices. It is very impressive, like the old two-tone, or I should say bi-material platinum steel Yachtmasters. This timepiece rocks. Mechanically, it's identical to the other watch we just saw, but you will note that some things are different on the dial side. It's got a cooler grayscale, more versatile aesthetic. This is a watch you can wear all the time. I'm not sure the dark side is an all-the-time watch. This definitely is. Take note, all these watches feature a twin register dial, but with a mono counter over at 3 o'clock. So we have chronograph minutes and hours on one register with two superimposed hands. And there's a handy feature for when you are traveling. There is a little time zone function, so you can actually jump the date forward or backwards, stepping it in 1 hour increments as you change time zones. The watch also has a very impressive feature outboard, as we get a ceramic capped deployant clasp. Each one of these features a corresponding ceramic material for the clasp itself. So whereas a lot of ceramic watches, for example Hublot, will give you a PVD metal buckle that will wind up scratching, with Omega, whether you're going with a pin buckle or a deploying clasp with these ceramic cases, you get a ceramic capped buckle to match. And of course, we've got a nice contrasting stitch here. It's a good looking watch in every regard. I'll throw it on the wrist. You'll see it's exactly the same in its fit as the dark side. This is very special. This is the one of the three that I'd be most likely to wear. Don't be scared of the size, 44 plus. It wears like a 42 on the wrist because it's short lug to lug and it is super light. Now, easily the most controversial, but also the most unique of the three, the white side of the moon. Now, this is not a lady's watch. It's too big to wear on almost any female wrist. So this is designed for a guy who wants something that looks like nothing else, not just in the Omega catalog, but pretty much anywhere else, as white ceramic, especially on a large, aggressive sports chronograph, is quite rare. Now, the same level of finishing you see on the others is present here. We have the satin finished mid case, and then we have the combination of polish and satin in close proximity with another zirconium oxide dial. You will see this one, in terms of lume, is similar to the dark side, and then mechanically they are all the same watch. What I like to do with this watch is get it on the white strap so you can wear it as the designers intended, but then also get the black strap from the dark side of the moon and fit the black strap ends to it and turn it into the Oreo look. The Oreo is a white side of the moon with the dark side of the moon straps flanking it. So you've got the cookie, and the cream in the middle. All right, jumping into the hero watch, the one I promised you. 41 millimeters, this is the 15500. If the Code 1159 was a disappointing debut for AP back in 2019, AP was ready for that. It had a huge range of stunning new Royal Oaks, and this one was the workhorse, the rank-and-file mainstream model designed to be water-resistant enough to swim with, rugged enough to wear every day, and still graceful enough to be your dress watch. So here we have the gray Grand Tapisserie dial. It is a pantograph cut hobnail with wonderful interstitial details. If you take a quick look, you can actually see there are 20,000 individual dots and divots on this dial. It's made on an old 19th century mimicry lathe. We have white gold hexagonal bolts inside a rounded octagon, which is the bezel. Since 1972, the bezel of the Royal Oak has been inspired by a vintage diving helmet. Hexagonal bolts, hexagonal crown, screw down with a 50-meter water resistant makes this surface swimmable. The bracelet takes 9 to 11 hours to hand finish, and that is a big part of what you're buying when you buy this watch. You're buying the hand finishing of the bracelet, the bezel, and the case. We have a hairline expression of the bezel gasket. That's always been a feature of Royal Oak design, and then a feature that I have appreciated since 2012, we have a monotone disc, a disc that matches the color of the dial on these watches. Taking a quick look at the case back, you can see there was a new movement for 2019. This is, of course, the movement that debuted in the Code 1159, and it is known as the 4302. It's an automatic winder with some upgrades over the old 3120. First, it's bigger, so it better fills the case back. Second, it has an extra 10 hours of power reserve, so it's now 70 hours. Still a free sprung balance with a full balance bridge for toughness, quick set date, as well as hacking seconds. It's a higher beat rate than the old 3120, now 28.8 instead of the old 21.6. It wears like a large watch. I'm not going to lie to you. This is more like wearing a 42 to a 43 millimeter watch because of its breadth across the wrist. Now, it's just about 9.9 millimeters thick, so it's easy to wear underneath the cuff. It could be your dress watch, no doubt. Just remember, you're going to need a wrist of at least 15 centimeters circumference to wear this watch well. It is loomed, and pretty well loomed at that. We'll do a quick loom shot here so you can get a sense. Hands, indices, logo, white gold, and this is a full-featured sports watch. Now, let's say you want a dress watch, and you want something that's contemporary, but not downright petite. Well, at 39 millimeters in rose gold, this is exactly what the doctor ordered. You're looking at the SBG W264 120-piece limited edition from Grand Seiko. It was part of the 60th anniversary, getting my math screwed up here, 60th anniversary of Grand Seiko for 2020. Now, 60 years since the original 3180, a lot has changed, but what Grand Seiko has gained in recent years has been a greater facility with icons of Japanese culture, and one might even say watches that are drawn directly from the imagery of the nature and the natural surroundings of Grand Seiko's factories and workshops, and that's what we have right here. The dial is an elaborate metallic green burst pattern that is designed to evoke the scatter of color and light as it plunges through the verdant canopy of summertime forests, and that's exactly what's trying to be evoked by this pattern. It's not precisely a sunburst, and it's not a brushed grain. It's a deeper texture. You can also see that there's a lot to love on this dial. It's a no-date dial, 3 hands, all this 39 millimeters, 12.2 millimeters thick, a dramatically cambered sapphire to give you the look of a vintage plexiglass. The watch with a 3-day power reserve manually wound, and it does include hacking or stop seconds to set precisely. The indices, as well as the hands and the logo, all finished on diamond-tipped micrometric milling tools. There are artisans at Grand Seiko who make these parts all day long, and it is such a specialized art that it really does require dedicated artisans who only do this. You can see the break between the satin and the polish of the Dauphine hands. Absolutely extraordinary. Turn it all over, the movement's good looking. 9S64 beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour, 24 joule hacking seconds, adjusted to 6 positions, one more than a standard Swiss chronometer, and again the 3-day power reserve, so it's got a little bit longer legs than you might expect from a standard dress watch. Throw it on the wrist and it looks the part. A handsome watch that easily slides underneath the cuff, short across the wrist too, just under 44 millimeters from lug to lug, so I can recommend this watch for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference, and it's a real viable unisex option. Another viable unisex option and a personal favorite is the Rolex Milgauss. The current version of the Milgauss is one of the most veteran in the Rolex catalog, and it's one of the most, I think, true to retail pricing on secondary markets. This is a watch that's still available new at Rolex boutiques, but can also be bought pre-owned for reasonable money. Now, it has gained value since the last year. The Ryzen subs, GMTs, Daytonas, Oyster Perpetuals, it's pulling up other models like the Explorer 2, the Milgauss, and the Yachtmaster, but these still represent very good value. What you're paying is what the watch is worth. At 40 millimeters and 100 meters water resistant, the steel case is a wonderfully rugged vessel for a movement that features a number of anti-magnetic elements. You still have the soft iron inner cage, the paramagnetic cage, but you also get an anti-magnetic escapement as well as niobium zirconium anti-magnetic hairspring. So while the original Milgauss, 6541, 6543 back in the 50s, those would have been 1000 Gauss anti-magnetic. This watch is almost certainly a lot more than that. Now you can also see this watch has no aversion to color. You'll note the dial is a matte black, and this is in contrast to the lacquered black dials you'll find on most Rolex watches. We also have elements of orange, the numerals outboard of the hour indices. We have tri-orange indices at 3, 6, and 9, and then the lightning bolt seconds hand, which, while it appears to be a bit postmodernist, is actually a feature drawn from the original 1950s Milgauss. Plus, we have the legendary glace vert, or green crystal. It's most obvious off-axis. This is one of the only Rolex crystals that doesn't feature the laser-engraved crown. Because of the tint, if it were there, it would be visible full-time. The watch is automatic winding with a 48-hour power reserve and a COSC chronometer certification. It wears very nicely on the wrist. It's low enough to slip underneath most cuffs, and being relatively narrow across the wrist, I can recommend this for a wrist as small as 13.5 to 14 centimeters in circumference. I've seen a lot of ladies wear the Milgauss, and I think it's quite viable in that regard. It's also kind of entertaining because it's one of the few Rolex watches that uses different grades of luminova, and if you look carefully, you can see that the 3, 6, and 9 indices are slightly darker than the others. A wonderful timepiece and my personal favorite current Rolex. But let's say you want something that's a little bit more core Rolex. Maybe you want a diver. Well, since 1967, the Sea Dweller has been the more deluxe of the Rolex divers. No longer a Submariner watch, and it hasn't been since the 1970s. Nevertheless, this example, launched as the 50th anniversary Sea Dweller in 2017, channeled the era of the Submariner 2000s, and you can see the red Sea Dweller script down on the base of the dial. Now, this dial is also wonderful matte black that's a little bit vintage evocative. It's not heavy-handed retro, but it's there. White gold indices and hands, ceramic insert in the bezel. The bezel is a crisp 120 click, and actually the numerals and the indices on the bezel are shallow deposits of platinum to resist oxidation and tarnish. Now, this one is 43 millimeters in diameter, but it doesn't wear like a deep sea that's 1 millimeter smaller. This wears a lot closer to a standard 40 millimeter Submariner or 41 millimeter Submariner now than it does to the deep sea. On the wrist, again, don't be fooled by the 1 millimeter size difference. It's really not like a deep sea. I couldn't wear a deep sea every day. I could wear this every day. Now, you've got the helium escape valve on the flank. I like the way that Rolex integrates it in comparison to the threaded knob that Omega uses. This timepiece is very practical, though big and certainly bulkier than a sub. It's also a watch that gives you more capability. You've got a 70-hour power reserve, COSC chronometer certification. That's the same as the current sub, but where this one pulls ahead of the sub is in the clasp. We still have the 20 millimeters of 2 millimeter incremental adjustment. Glide lock is still there, but we get a fold-out flip lock extension. The two of them combining for over 50 millimeters of total extension is a very handy feature. And of course, the watch can still be used even if you're a landlubber like me and you don't like to swim or dive or get wet, you can use those extensions to wear the watch over a winter coat or a sweater if you do have to go external while snowball fighting or riding ATVs or snowmobiles or hunting at your lodge. This watch is ready for that with that extension to wear over thick winter clothes. Let's do a quick lume shot because it is a dive watch after all. And you can see, like the Milgauss, it uses Rolex's latest Chroma-Light Blue lume. Rolex making everything, including lubricants and lume in-house, highly integrated. Rolex gives you a watch that is all Rolex. Let's get our dark sides out of the way. Now, I've got an awful lot of Audemars Piguet for you, so buckle up, because we're starting with one of the most discussed watches of all time. The Code 1159, launched in 2019, there were complaints about the automatic and the chronograph because, frankly, the dials, though fairly expensive and lacquered, looked rather flat and featureless. Well, Audemars Piguet realized pretty quickly that it needed to do something, so it added a gradient, and this model, launched for 2020, gives you a gradient from a sort of silver metallic at center to a dark black at the edge. We have rose gold indices, hands, chapter rings for the sub-registers, logo, and Arabic numeral 12. You can see the lacquer is rich, with alternating layers of color and clear coat applied and then buffed by hand. It looks like enamel. We've got a tachymeter scale outboard, and this is a watch with a flyback chronograph. So between the tachymeter and the flyback chronograph, it's sporty as dress watches go. The other feature I love here is an excellent use of two-tone. The primary case, which is 41 millimeters in diameter, that's made of white gold. The inner case is rose gold, and the contrast between the two is delicious. You can see that there are a lot of references to the Royal Oak. The mid case features a rounded octagon form, just like the bezel of the Royal Oak, and then you can see that the screws fixing the bars to the strap, those are hexagonal like the crown and the bezel bolts of the Royal Oak. Now this watch features the caliber 4401 flyback automatic column wheel vertical clutch, larger size than previous AP chronographs. And remember, previous AP chronograph automatic movements were either the Frédéric Piguet 1185 or a modular 3126 with a Dubois de Praz 3840 modular on top. This is fully integrated and executed in-house. It is very special because for the first time we have that all in-house integrated AP chronograph caliber. It features stop seconds. It features a quick set date. It features a flyback function. It features a crisp column wheel and a smooth vertical clutch. And all of this in a watch that has immense presence. There were reservations about this watch because initial photos were bad and the initial dials looked flat. But the watch now is admittedly a large dress watch. It wears more like a sports watch, but in terms of the nuances of its design and the quality of its detailing, it's as good as anything you'll find in the industry. And because this movement was intended for use in the offshores as well as the Royal Oak, it's tough like a sports watch movement with an architecture that's fairly stiff, fairly thick, and blessed with a free-sprung balance and a full balance bridge. It's quite tough as well. This is a fantastic watch, and while I didn't like the initial dials, I loved everything else. I finally warmed up to this watch because AP fixed the single most glaring deficiency. Okay, let's go a little bit more old school to the dawn of the modern era. And for Audemars Piguet, the modern era starts in 1972 with the Royal Oak. Now that watch was actually stainless steel, but what a lot of people forget is that the prototypes that went to the watch shows in 1972 were made of white gold because AP did not at the time have the tooling to work with stainless steel, and its contract didn't have the tooling to work with stainless steel quickly enough to get the prototypes up and running. So the initial Royal Oak showpieces were white gold. So this yellow gold example from early in production of the 5402 is in some ways true to the very first Royal Oaks. We have a lovely petite tapisserie dial in gray with yellow gold indices, yellow gold logo, yellow gold hands. This is an original tritium dial. You can see the white gold hexagonal bolts inside the bezel. And while the watch has been refinished in its life, it's been done professionally and sparingly. As you can see, the bevels along the shoulders of the links, the expanding bevel from the mid case, the break between the satination and the polish of the bezel, as well as the satin flank of the bezel and the rounded polished facets. All of this remains pronounced. You can't see it inside the case, but we have the caliber 2121 JLC based ultra thin with a 2.4 millimeter thick base, automatic winding, and quite finely finished. This is a movement created by JLC for AP, Patek, and Vacheron in 1967. It was also used in the Nautilus 3700. and it was also used in the Vacheron 222. So this is a legendary movement in a legendary watch, and again, we are talking a reference 5402, the very first Royal Oak. Of course, the very first Royal Oaks used a monoblock case construction. If you pull the crown out, you could see there's, as close as we can, there's a little notch above the crown, and everything loads through the front of this watch. So the case back is the same as the mid case. This idea was A, to make it thinner, and B, to make it more water resistant. Now, I don't recommend you take a vintage watch over 40 years old into the water, but it is important to know that the monoblock case construction today has been discontinued for ease of manufacturing and, frankly, cost considerations. So every feature of these old watches, such as the original monoblock case construction, is really a selling point. And of course, this watch only 8.1 millimeters thick, ultra thin, super slick, and handsome on the wrist. This is a way to go vintage without compromise, as the watch looks essentially just like a jumbo of 2021. And this year will be the last year of the current generation jumbo, which is pushing up the price of the current 15202, but also all of the 39 millimeter jumbo references that came before. That said, not everyone likes the jumbo. Some folks prefer a little bit more durability, more advanced movement, and yet they prefer the 39 millimeter case, and this model, made from 2005 to 2011, gives you that. This is the reference 15300. It's the 39 millimeter, but whereas the jumbo has a push-down crown, this one has a screw-down crown. Whereas the jumbo has the JLC caliber with its 40-hour power reserve, this one has the caliber 3120 with its 60-hour power reserve. You'll also find here a more durable bracelet. The construction of it feels more substantial in the hand. The clasp, although an older example with the AP logo style folding members, is considerably stronger than what you'll get on the jumbo. It's a twin fold, twin trigger deployant clasp that's quite solid. Inside you have polished satination as well as media blasting. It's triple finished internally. The case, as you can see, features sharp lines, undiminished by age, and the most sought dial from this generation, and really every generation of the Royal Oak, the galvanized blue dial. These were reserved back during the production era of the 15300 for premier retailers as well as AP boutiques, and this is still the dial a lot of folks seek when they seek a Royal Oak. This is the best of the best from the 15300s, the stainless steel case as well as the blue dial. And on the wrist, every Royal Oak wears about 2 millimeters larger than its rated size. So whereas this is a 39, it really does wear like a 41, and the 41 wears like a 43. So between the 15500 that I showed you earlier and this watch right here, I'm going to choose this watch if I'm spending my own money to buy an example. It just wears better, and it's friendly for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters in circumference. It's also beautifully finished, and again, just think of the time that goes into making this case, bracelet, and clasp for you. And that's before we get to the pantograph cut dial and the movement, which is a blend of machine and hand finishing. Okay, let's talk about affordable alternatives for a moment. Let's start with this. This guy, launched in 2018, was the latest refresh of a model launched in 1993, sometimes known as the James Bond Seamaster, because this was the model back in the 90s and early 2000s that Pierce Brosnan wore during his turn as 007. Now, this watch has come a long way since then, now 42 millimeters rather than 41. The dial, no longer a printed dial, but with applique indices, and it's made of polished ceramic. All the advantages of enamel, none of its fragility or expense. You can also see that the Omega Wave returned after a 2012 to 2017 hiatus. It looks right on these watches. We now have a conical helium escape valve, and unlike previous generations, you can actually open the valve during a dive while submerged. The bezel is ceramic insert, stainless steel, 120 click, and then the indices and the numerals, that's actually a cold enamel fill. We have a very substantial bracelet, and whereas the original version of this bracelet had rolled shoulders to the flanking links and looked a little bit like a dress bracelet, this one's much more overtly squared off and sporty. A feature previously exclusive to the more expensive Omega divers. Here we get a push-button slider, so we have that incremental adjustability, but then we also have a fold-out extension. That used to be exclusive to the Planet Oceans and the Plo Profs. Now we have that here on the Diver 300 meter. I should also mention that we have a little micro link in there, so if for whatever reason you want to fine-tune, you have a couple of different ways to do it. The slider is 9.6 millimeters of adjustment, and it is incremental and push-button to make it user-friendly. Through the case back, caliber 8800, 55-hour power reserve, anti-magnetic, coaxial, master chronometer, tested not as bare movement as with the COSC, but as a fully cased-up watch. The METAS Master Chronometer Test tests water resistance, winding efficiency, power reserve, chronometry, shock resistance, and anti-magnetism, all of them at once on the fully assembled watch. So this watch has been thoroughly vetted, and it represents superb value. Don't pay $24,000 for a Hulk. Yes, I've got them to sell you, but if I'm going to be frank, this is the same experience. A watch that's just as good with none of the brand baggage or pretense for a fraction of the price. You can see Omega uses differential lume color, as the minute hand is easy to pick out, so you can read at a glance against the bezel while the watch is in the water. Otherwise, if they were both blue, there might be some confusion between the hour hand and the minute hand. By creating differential lume, we do not have that problem. Budgets. We're sticking with them for now. Louis Erard. Le Regulator, a model that came out in 2019, a 178-piece limited edition 40mm in black and steel between Louis Erard and Alain Silberstein. Of course, the watch featuring his de style-derived primary color decorations. Silberstein, from the 1980s through 2012, built watches as an architect working in the watch industry, and he loved the imagery of early modernism. And so this watch, equal parts serious horology and unserious, fun-loving art, is a wonderful piece because it's affordable, it's wearable, it's technically cool, but it's not too expensive. As you can see, the watch uses a Peugeot base caliber, which beats away at 21.6, and it has a 42-hour power reserve. On the dial side, we have a Louis Erard complication added, so a regulator dial, and you can see we have a separation of hours, minutes, and seconds, and that is the idea. We also have a power reserve indicator at 3 o'clock, so they are adding a little bit of complication. It wears beautifully. It's got a custom strap. As you can see, it has a contrasting red stitch. This was one of two models launched. One had a white dial, one had a black dial. I prefer this of the two, and Silberstein now, with collaborations across the board with high and low horology partners, bringing back his name and the currency in his name with fun-loving collaborations that take what was best about his brand and transpose them onto watches from brands that will always be around to service the timepieces. He's worked with, of course, Louis Erard. He's worked with Romain Jérôme, which sadly is not around to service the timepieces, but then he's also worked with MB&F. For me, this brand, launched in 2003, is one of the most interesting because it does give you a great deal of innovation, and each year they come out with another cool collaboration. They do enamel, they do collaborations with Vianney Halter, with Alain Silberstein, and these watches, again, not super hyped, but well regarded in collector circles. Finally, talk about brands that are around forever here. This was a boutique exclusive launched by Zenith, the Captain series, with the elite caliber inside with palladium smoked dials. The dial is precious metal palladium with a fume fade, gray at the edge, silver at the center. The timepiece, 40mm in steel, is handsome, graceful, and proves you don't need to go Patek Vacheron or even Lange to get a fine dress watch. On the reverse side, you can see the elite caliber 670 automatic winding, 50-hour power reserve, stop seconds, and a feature that I love on these, a bi-directional quickset. You can actually turn it in both directions, and so you have that flexibility to adjust either way. Surprisingly, very few watches offer that. Now, the timepiece, as you can see, is a dress watch and easy to wear. Flat, flush, nicely sloped on its case flank. This is a timepiece for him or for her. It wears well enough on my 16-centimeter circumference wrist that you can see how easily it slides underneath the cuff. Comfortable, compact, and yet does have a little bit of weight to it due to the palladium dial. This is an agreeable look and one that anticipated the later fad for fume dials. Zenith got there way before Moser. Here's a brand that's actually coming back this fall. Of course, HYT declared bankruptcy, but their sister company, Pressiflex, which owns all the patents on their technology, is not bankrupt, and Pressiflex has been providing service for the HYT watches while HYT itself reorganizes. This model launched in 2019 in 25 pieces. This is an absolute stunner called the H5. It was designed in collaboration with Pressiflex and Eric Coudray, who is a celebrity watchmaker who's worked variously with Cabestan, Harry Winston, of course, Jaeger-LeCoultre. It's where he cut his teeth in watchmaking, and complicated watchmaking at that. What he does on this model is he takes the standard 101 caliber and he redesigns it as the 501. Now, what's changed here is that we have a more obvious lever-actuated system that's cam-based for moving the plungers that contain the two immiscible liquids. So I'll demonstrate what I mean here. This watch is a regulator. We have the seconds, we have the minutes, and then we have the hours. And the meniscus between the clear liquid and the green liquid is the hour indicator. So right now you can see 60, it's 4. We're right at 4 o'clock. Now it's 4:30. So not only is it a regulator, and not only do you read that time relative to the meniscus, but when it reaches the end of its travel, this regulator becomes a retrograde, and the hour retrogrades all the way back to the other side. So you see 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 12 hours times 2 trips around the dial. That's how this works. We have a power reserve indicator. The power reserve manually wound is 65 hours. And then you can see the architecture of the 501 movement's a little bit more machine aesthetic than the standard 101. The two bellows hold the liquids, and it's a standard Swiss lever escapement. You can see the flanks allowing you to read all of this laterally. And you can see that it is very well loomed, and you can actually read it in the dark. On the reverse side, make sure I've got everything adjusted here. On the reverse side, what really changes for this caliber 501 is that we have a system whereby the barrel interacts with this lever and cam, making the conduit between the mechanical Swiss lever movement and the fluidic display more obvious. And it's the interaction through the cam on the barrel and the lever arm and its cam that translates the action of the mechanical movement into the motion of the liquid on the dial. And again, it is a very easy watch to wear. In spite of being 48.8 millimeters in diameter, it's a round lugless case. This H0 case debuted back in 2017, and immediately HYT's watches, previously unwearable on small wrists, became a perfect fit. Since this watch is 48 millimeters round, it's also just 48.8 millimeters lug tip to lug tip, and it's mostly sapphire, so it's almost impossible to scratch the steel case. A very cool watch from a fun independent that is, again, coming back, and Pressiflex, which is its sister company, is still very much in business and solvent and servicing these watches. So if you have an HYT right now, never mind what HYT does. These are serviceable with Pressiflex. Two watches on rubber straps, disparate price points. This is not my watch. My watch is right here. This watch, however, did ship with two straps, leather and silicone. So this is the Zenith EZCM 1.1, launched in 2017, 500 pieces, 41 millimeters in 1200 to 1500 Vickers hard tegmented steel. It is a tribute in 43 millimeters to, I'm sorry, did I call it a 41? It's a 43, and it's a tribute to the original EZM 1 of 1997. So that was a 40 millimeter titanium watch with a Lemania 5100 movement. That was created for the ZUZ, which is a German Federal Customs Enforcement unit. So anti-narcotics, anti-human trafficking, an elite unit, and they needed a mission timer. So this watch was designed to be a mission timer. It has two different means of timing. So you see you have the bezel, which is a countdown bezel. You line that up with the minute hand, and it will count down from 60. But you also have a Lemania-style re-engineering of a Valjoux 7750. You see this SZ01? So they redesigned the 7750 to work like the original watch's Lemania 5100. So you have a radial 60-minute indicator. You read the minutes off the center hand, and it's a 60-minute indicator. The watch is elaborately loomed, as you could see. Plenty of lume, including the chronograph hands and the bezel. The timepiece includes that tegmented case, which is so hard you can actually scratch it to death with your key and then wipe the residue of your key off the case. I've done it. It works. You see AR on the dial. The reason for that is originally they would have filled these watches with argon. That was what Zinn was doing in the early 2000s. Today, they still use an inert gas. They use a nitrogen fill to displace all moisture as well as impurities from the case during manufacture, but they still use the AR chemical symbol. The dial is matte black for high contrast. Everything that is not essential is printed either in black or in red, including the date disc. You have a copper sulfate capsule in the flank of the case. That can be replaced. You screw it in, and it will remove any moisture that manages to intrude into the case after manufacture. It'll turn from white, which it is now, to dark blue when it's ready for a change. The bezel is of captive construction, so you have these little screws that actually hold the bezel to the case, so you can't snap it off like you would with an Omega or Rolex bezel. You can hit a bezel on a Rolex and it'll pop off. That cannot happen here. The movement, again, they call it the SC01 because they did a heck of a lot of original watchmaking on it, and it is based on a 7750, so automatic winding, quick set date, stop seconds, 42-hour power reserve, and a 4 hertz beat rate. It is 200 meters water resistant. It is a 500-piece limited edition. This is a nice round number 150 with a screw-down crown, and it's actually heat resistant between negative 45 degrees Celsius and 80 degrees Celsius. As you can see, the strap is uncut. We will cut it for you to make sure it's sized for your wrist. The clasp, which is a single fold, uses a twin trigger release, and then you can see there is a fold-out extension built in. It's not a dive watch, but you can use it over a wetsuit, a dry suit, any kind of suit. Also worth mentioning, the timepiece features a case made by Zin. If you were to look at the case flank, let me see if I can find it. Here's mine. You could see it says SUG on the side. That is Zin's case factory. So if you're worried about how much of this watch is actually made in-house, the case is their own, the tegment effects are their own, the movement is modified and re-engineered in-house, and then you get a lot of original Zin technologies. The watch wears very comfortable on the silicone strap. I still have mine uncut, and this one also is uncut. Also note that the strap is specific to the model. It's not a generic strap. It has the name of the model on it, and it wears quite well. A handsome piece, and arguably more comfortable on the silicone strap than the leather strap. I'm just wearing the leather because I love my boxes and papers. I love my accessories. I want to keep everything original and keep my strap uncut. When you get this watch, you will get the choice. And yes, the watch comes with spring bars as well as strap tools. Okay. That's the last of our budget watches. Now we're upping the ante. Okay, brand new, hot off the presses. For 2021, this is the 5968G blue dial, gradient dial. This is the Aquanaut Chronograph. Lots to love here. 42.2 millimeters in white gold. You can see that it is well loomed, both numerals and indices. It is a chronograph with a 60-minute register, which I adore. You can see the geosphere cut that's typical of Aquanaut dials and has been since 1997. It has a 60-minute chrono register, and by the way, it is a flyback chronograph, reset and restart with a single push of the trigger. In fact, if you want to use the chronograph as your seconds hand, set the watch precisely and then zero it out so your watch is synchronized to the second. Because of the vertical clutch, you can leave the chronograph running full time with no hazard to the movement, so you'll have effectively your seconds, your minutes, and your hours all at center. There is a date. It has a little push register on the flank to adjust it, and that's because this movement is derived from the 5960 annual calendar, which uses push adjusters. The case is all white gold and absolutely immaculate. Not a scratch, not a swirl. The movement is good looking. Vertical clutch, column wheel, 55-hour power reserve, automatic winding, 28,520, free sprung with an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. Lots to love. And again, this watch is so fresh, I'm not even taking the clasp out of its rubber wrap. This is a timepiece if you want something that's as good as it has ever been. Straight from the factory mint. If you want that level of condition, provenance, and recency, you want this watch. Oh yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it, but here we have the composite strap in matching blue, and all of this is 120 meters water resistant with a slight gradient fade from light at the center to dark at the edge of the dial. Zenith. Oh, I love Zenith. And in 2010, Zenith launched a watch that represents pretty much the full-featured El Primero, as good as any El Primero caliber ever made. The 4026 gives you a chronometer certification, automatic winding, the 36,000 vibration per hour column wheel El Primero chronograph, a grande date, and a coaxial rattrapant. It is a split seconds chronograph, all of this with a chronometer certification. 44 millimeters in steel and rose gold. This watch is wonderfully sporty. It even has a 100-meter water resistance, so if you put it on a water-resistant strap, this large and in charge multi-complication can be your sports watch. It's well loomed. It's handsome. It's large. It's remarkably involved. This is one of the most complicated El Primero movements ever made, and one of the few non-Rolex El Primeros to be chronometer certified. I would not wear this watch on a wrist smaller than mine. Certainly, you don't want to wear this on a tiny wrist. 16 centimeters circumference, that's my wrist, and I feel like I'm pushing right out to the edge of what's possible. It's comfortable, but I can see a 15 centimeter circumference wrist not wearing this terribly well. So size and complication generally go together, and that's the case right here. But forget the Royal Oak Offshore, forget the Hublot Big Bang. This has so much more horological street cred, as well as complication and a tie to the heritage and history of one of the great brands in the industry and one of the all-time great movements, the El Primero. Still 36,000 vibrations per hour with a 50-hour power reserve. I love everything about this watch. And yes, you get a full deployant clasp, so it is good value as well. It is a rare day when I have an automaton watch on the show, but that's exactly what we have today. 40 millimeters in yellow gold, made in the early 90s by Ulysse Nardin. This is the San Marco Hour Striker, sometimes described as the Hour Striker San Marco, and you can see it as the San Marco model line. What makes this more intriguing is that there is actually a link to San Marco, and you have the line of San Marco, and you have the St. Mark's Tower Jacquemart, or Hour Striker, that you would actually find in the piazza of the same name in Venice. So the Piazza San Marco with the clock tower, St. Mark's, and then the Jacquemart, or the Striker. What we have here is a partially guilloche center and then mother-of-pearl bounded Breguet numeral dial with an actual animated figure. I'm going to show you how this works. So you see, we are past 10 o'clock. Now we're 10, 21, 22, 23, about 10:23. It is an hour striker. It can be turned off or on. When it's on, it will work en passant, or striking the hour on the hour and then 30 minutes after the hour, but it can also be told to chime the hour on demand. Here's how that works. And the way this works is you wind it clockwise to energize the striking system, and then you turn it counterclockwise to wind the movement. Though to be fair, the base is an ETA 2892, so it is automatic winding. You don't need to wind it in order for the watch to run. You do need to wind it in order for the striking system to work. It is UN caliber 75, which is a modular movement that uses a striking complication developed by Christophe Claret, and then the base is ETA, so you get the best of both worlds, high horology and then a workhorse automatic that will be reliable. You can see the case, 40 millimeters in yellow gold, is made old school, with the lugs built separately from the case band, inserted into notches in the case flank, and then welded together with evidence of the weld removed to create that sharp break between case band and lug. This is a watch that would have involved extensive hand finishing and hand tuning, both inside and outside. This is about as cool as it gets. These Ulysse Nardin automaton watches are rare, exquisite, and they bring together the best ETA-based movement. You've got the Christophe Claret module, and then Ulysse Nardin, which certainly marches to its own drummer's beat. A very quirky, and at the time in the early 90s, pioneering independent brand. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.